Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Cole here, and today we are doing the first ever Chol's Corner. It's like Moist Meter, but done by a guy with even worse opinions. And today we're going to be talking about my final thoughts on Jedi Survivor. I am very late to the party on this one. This game came out back on April 28th. And that's for a lot of reasons. First of all, Dead Island 2 came out exactly a week before it, so we were already working through that game at the time. Second of all, this game was a 100% playthrough on stream, and it was a lot bigger than I was expecting it to be, but we'll get into that in a second. Third, being that Tears of the Kingdom came out a couple weeks later, and I've also been working on 100%ing that game, which is never going to end. And then of course, as of recording, about a week ago we had Street Fighter 6 come out, and just a couple days ago we had Diablo 4 come out. So it's just been a really busy time for someone like me who tries to cover a lot of new games, but I finally finished up the 100% on this one, so I'm finally ready to do a review and fully talk about it. And I feel like we can't really talk about this game without talking at least a little bit about the first game, Fallen Order, coming out a few years ago. Fallen Order had a really solid foundation, but it never felt fully realized at the time. But one thing that was very apparent when I played Fallen Order was that Respawn just kind of gets Star Wars. It had all that perfect balance of like serious elements and just more fun and like whimsical stuff. It really just felt like a Star Wars story back then, and I really enjoyed Cal's character as a younger Jedi who got some training as a really young kid, but never really got to fully formally train as a Jedi Knight because Order 66 happened when he was like 8 years old. But now Jedi Survivor to me kind of feels like the Arkham City to Fallen Order's Arkham Asylum. It just feels so much more realized and like it has so much more of a cohesive vision, and there's a lot still wrong here, but there's so much that has been improved from Fallen Order. And I guess just getting right into that, the story for me was a big highlight of the game. This game is just really, really well written, and one of my favorite pieces of the story is Cal's questioning of Jedi tradition and practices. Back in Fallen Order, we kind of got more of an optimistic Cal who kind of mirrored Luke Skywalker's enthusiasm when he first started training as a Jedi. But here we have a Cal who has kind of come to terms with the fact that he's really alone in the universe as one of the only remaining Jedi out there. And he's really kind of grappling with that idea where if the Jedi tradition and practice was so strong, then why is he one of the only remaining Jedi? Why were they all killed off so quickly if what they were doing was right? It comes across through a lot of the story, and I don't want to really spoil it because the game has still only been out for like a month and a half, but just know that there's a lot of really good stuff here. One thing that I can talk about, I feel like because it's early on enough and you've probably already seen it, is that Cal gets a blaster pretty early on in the game, and this is just one of those fun things. In traditional Jedi practice, using a blaster is pretty much sacrilege, but Cal here is just kind of like, well, if the Empire uses guns, then why don't I? And he gets himself a little pistol and he runs around kind of doing this like half Jedi, half space cowboy bullshit. And it's just really fun to see him holding a blaster in one hand and shooting with it and swinging with a lightsaber in the other. It's a really good time, and I think it's really cool to see one of those like new school Jedi kind of taking this approach. And overall, I just feel like at a time where Star Wars as a franchise feels pretty adrift and like it's kind of just being milked for every corporate dollar it's worth, Respawn shows here that they really just get what makes a Star Wars story feel like Star Wars. And this is a notably darker Star Wars story, but it still just feels so much more like that original trilogy than anything we've gotten really since then. Now, slowly moving into gameplay a little bit, the world here is a lot bigger. Fallen Order had a few planets, and all of them were kind of like this semi-open map. They would have these set pathways, but there would be little branches off to the side where you can like go and grab a health increase or something like that. But here they've gone with more of a full-blown open world design with a couple of planets in the game, and in my opinion, the world almost feels too big for its own good. To put into perspective, the first game took me about 35 hours to 100% on stream without a guide or anything, and here in Jedi Survivor, it took me about 75. While wider exploration did feel pretty enjoyable early on, there were so many meaningless collectibles that I spent hours grinding out, not because I really wanted them, but just because I had to get them to get that number to go up. While there were those things like max health increase, max force capacity increase, stuff like that, there was also just a plethora of like plant seeds and BD1 paint materials and all that sort of stuff that just every time I would find one of those, I would feel nothing. It would just be one thing checked off the list onto the other, and that was more collectibles than not. The game also has some of the most horrendous invisible walls that I have ever seen. There were so many areas where I could have used Cal's movement abilities to reach an area in an unintended way, but there was just a blatant invisible wall preventing me from doing it any way other than the exact way Respawn wanted me to. It's not really a big deal, but when you're playing an open world game, feeling restricted, there's so much like dissonance to it. I don't even know how to put it into words. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something that's frustrating, and it starts to wear on you the more and more it happens over the course of, like I said, like 75 hours. But on the topic of those collectibles, while there are so many that I never even touched, the customization stuff in this game is really good. And like customizing Cal's outfit feels great, but what's really big is the lightsaber. I think that Respawn just gets that when you're making a Star Wars game where the whole gimmick is that you play as a Jedi, one of the best things you can do is let players make their own lightsaber, and that is something that they went like all in on with this game. There are so many possible combinations of what you can do with your lightsaber, it's honestly absurd. I did eventually end up just kind of making like my definitive lightsaber, and I never really changed it after that. But just the fact that I was able to do that and like have a lightsaber that I was attached to is a really big deal. And I guess on the topic of the lightsaber, we can get into the combat, where for me, the highlight of the gameplay here is easily the variety in the stances that you can use with your lightsaber. In total, you've got 5 of them. You've got the classic single blade, you've got your double bladed like Darth Maul style, you can dual wield them kind of Ahsoka Tano style. Then you've got the blaster style, which is completely new to Cal. That's what I was talking about earlier, where like you've got the blaster in your left hand and the lightsaber in your right, and you're just kind of alternating between like taking swings with your lightsaber and point blank shots with your blaster. That's a great time. And then, of course, you've got the crossguard that was shown off in the trailers so much, the full-blown Kylo Ren lightsaber. And of course, this thing is fun. Each stance here has its own gimmick to it, too. Like, the double-bladed stance is the most defensive, it's for crowd control, that sort of thing. But then, like, the crossguard's gimmick is that it's the highest damaging stance, but it's really heavy and slow, so the attack windups are really long. And it's just stuff like that that makes each stance feel so unique to one another and gives so many reasons to like change up your playstyle throughout the game. And for the most part, playing this game on the highest difficulty felt great to me. Even at sometimes it felt fantastic, but there are some times where it's the complete opposite. Respawn still has a massive problem when it comes to designing bosses in these games. There are just so many like wonky hitboxes and random one-shot attacks, and a lot of the time, both of those rolled into one attack. It's just so frustrating, and it did happen here and there back in Fallen Order, but because this game's scale is so much larger, there are so many more times where you're going to come across enemies like that on the highest difficulty that will just hit you so unfairly, and on top of just taking the hit unfairly, you're instantly dead and you just need to start over. It's really frustrating, but overall, the combat here is so fun. I didn't even get into like how expanded the force abilities are because honestly, I didn't use them a whole lot. I was so impressed with like the lightsaber stuff. I got kind of tunnel visioned on it. And even though I played so many hours of the game, I barely even touched the force abilities, even though I upgraded all those skill trees fully. So overall, the rating here is going to be kind of weird, I'm just going to warn you. The intention with this is to be like a less formal review where I just don't even like write notes or write up a script or anything. I've genuinely just sat in front of my microphone and rambled for the last 15 minutes. So my score isn't going to be like a super objective score. It's going to be very opinionated, and it's going to be very based on my experience with the game. And I didn't mention it throughout the video, but it is going to be a part of my score. The performance on this game at launch was horrendous, and I'm not even including that bit in the score. What I am including is that even though I'm like a month and a half late to this review, the performance is still not fixed. It's slightly better. I get like 10 FPS more on average across the whole game, but they've barely done anything to fix it despite having put out like 5 or 6 patches at this point. There are still some areas in this game where on my hardware I was dipping down into like the 20s in frames per second, and while these were very isolated spots, they were very consistent. And again, it's been a month and a half. Like, this stuff should be at least above 30 FPS. We've had time to fix this. The 100% experience here was pretty awful. Like, honestly, one of the worst that I've had in the last couple of years of doing 100% playthroughs on YouTube. And I really like and recommend this game to people, but I absolutely do not recommend that anyone dedicate themselves to a 100% with the game like I did. So all up, I'm going to be giving Jedi Survivor a 7.8. I feel like that's about representative of my total experience. There was a lot of really, really good stuff here for me as a Star Wars fan, but there was a lot for me as someone who has studied game design and development for years and years that I just can't in good faith give it a much higher score than I did. And again, my 100% experience was not great. It's bringing down the score a little bit. But yeah, final informal review score for me is going to be a 7.8. But now this is where I want to hand it off to you guys. What do you think of the game? Have you played it, watched it? Do you have any thoughts on it at all? Let me know down in the comments below. I really want to get a discussion going on these videos, have everyone kind of sharing opinions amongst each other. So feel free to drop them down there because even if you think that we don't care, I want to see them. Also, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to go ahead and leave a like, a sub, comment, all those generic things that people ask for on YouTube videos just to help out with the algorithm. I'd really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this video, then you'll probably enjoy this much more well-executed one where I talked about the Far Cry game that everyone forgot about. Feel free to check it out right here on screen.